We continue our coverage of the U.S. elections. I tell you what, it gets more and more interesting as time goes on. Certainly different ways that the conversation is kept going, and notwithstanding when you look at what the U.S. President Donald Trump is saying about the vote counting process, and this election still neck and neck. All eyes now on those key swing states. Bungalo just gave us a sense of what those numbers are looking like. And in studio with me, political commentator Makosini Mgitwa, and also Elizabeth Sidiropolous, who is with the South African Institute of International Affairs. Elizabeth, you're the newest panel member, so only fair that I begin with you tonight. I mean, you know, and I ask this question also because of the kind of work that you do in this space. So just on your collective knowledge, have you ever seen anything like this? Like where we are right now?
No, this is the last 4 years, I think, have been an interesting journey, I think, for all political commentators, certainly those watching the US space. And I think nobody expected this election probably to be any different. Certainly, we have seen the, shall we say, non-respect or non-adherence to a lot of the informal norms of how elections are conducted, and the whole issue around who concedes and who declares victory, and how, all of that sort of ritual that goes around the elections on the day. And of course, in the run-up, I think what has been very concerning has been the fact that the President of the United States himself has actually questioned the integrity of the system. Granted, the electoral system in the US is very complicated. You don't have an independent electoral commission that runs the show, you know, countrywide. You have 50 different systems and processes. But to question the integrity, and to say, like you were just reading out now from his timeline, that they're finding Biden votes. Well, that's what happens when you have, you know, when you count the votes. You may find Biden votes and you may find Trump votes. That's what happens. And certainly, as far as the postal ballots are concerned, it is by far the highest that it has ever been. And so one must expect that things will take time. One must also expect that there will be issues that come up, there will be disputes, but that, you know, there is a process for dealing with those disputes. And it's certainly not to throw oil in the fire at this moment, in terms, because this is already it's been a highly polarized climate even before the elections. You know, this whole sort of administration, the last 4 years have seen a increasing polarization of American society. And you really need, you know, in those senior leadership positions, you need to exercise responsibility and discretion.
The U.S. in many ways has been seen as a leader of democracy. When you look at how some of the institutions that help organize the world order, they're very much a leader in those institutions. What does having a president like U.S. President Donald Trump and the current tone that he's setting around the way in which his own electoral processes can be questioned, what tone does that set? I mean, what basis would America then now have to raise issue with an election taking place, let's say, on the African continent, as would always be the case? Do they lose that legitimacy?
Well, this is the thing, you know. So the U.S. has always sort of positioned itself as this, you know, great city on the hill, and certainly inside the U.S., I mean, its democracy, for all its flaws, has been one certainly that the world tends to look up to. Its promotion of democracy elsewhere in the world has been problematic, and a lot of it has, you know, there's been double standards and so on. But certainly, you know, you expect that the United States, as the leader, as it calls itself, leader of the free world, is a state that you can look up to in terms of its internal processes. Not that there aren't always any problems, but that there are systems in place and institutions in place to actually be able to deal with them. That's what you want. So that, how this election proceeds and how it plays out, I think will play an important role in the external perception of the US and how all of these disputes and issues are managed. But at the same time, more generally, in terms of the US's contribution to institution building on the global stage, what President Trump has chosen to do with multilateralism is to say it actually constrains the US, doesn't actually help the US to influence and to play a leadership role in global affairs. It constrains it, and so we've seen the US pull away, certainly from Paris Climate Accords, the WHO. It's had issues with the UN, with UNESCO, and so on and so forth. And we see on the other side a China that is actually saying multilateralism is good, and multilateralism can also advance our own particular interests and our influence, and so we need to engage with these institutions, we need to support them, and so on. And so you have that dual sort of approach of a democracy at home that people are worrying about, but also the rules and systems at the multilateral level that the US has turned away from, even though it was one of the primary creators of.
Sure. Makosini, do you think that just based on some of the things that Elizabeth has said, that perception of exceptionalism of the US will change as a result of this particular moment in history?
The entire presidency of Donald Trump is really about changing, geopolitics and how we see America. That goes to his attitude about NATO, the Iran deal, and some of the things that Elizabeth was talking about. And that is what worries other people within the American establishment, that America is losing its leadership role in the world. But I've got my own views about whether that's a good thing or bad thing, because that order that we've had for all these decades, I don't know where it has put South Africa and other, developing economies, the third world, as it were. And, the rise in power of China has got its own dynamics, and so is the rise in Russia, at least in terms of, stature in world politics. Yes, the USA is not going to be the same after Donald Trump, and it's going to take them a lot of time to go back to that position in which they were. We've known America throughout our lives because we consume a lot of their culture. We watch their movies, we listen to their music, and there they position themselves differently to what they really are. And I think the presidency of Donald Trump has showed us what exactly America is. His stance on white supremacy, racism, and all these things, and for him to be polling the way he's polling, I think speaks more about America than it does about Donald Trump.
The themes that you're raising, and you're talking about America showing, Trump revealing effectively who and what America is. And I suppose in terms of how polarized the country is, how divided the country is, it has absolutely done that. So when you then have to determine foreign policy for a country who, Elizabeth, diplomats who have been part of the establishment for a long time would have their set way of doing things and would want to do things in a particular way. And you have somebody who sees himself as a complete disruptor, who doesn't play by the book. Quite frankly, the book doesn't exist in his world.
He's writing a new one.
Exactly, he's writing a new one. What does that do? Because I remember just in the first couple of years of his presidency, the world was almost in shock, thinking, but wait, no, this is not what a president does. This is not how a president behaves. But people somewhat got used to it being Trump. So it may not be what a president does, but it's what Donald Trump does.
So he has been a major disruptor, certainly in foreign policy, because particularly with the long-standing allies of the United States, I think the issue of predictability has been removed from the table. He's not predictable, or he is predictable in his unpredictability. So it hasn't helped, paradoxically, the US in saying, America first, we want to be strong, we want to have it our way. What has made America over the last 75 years, since the end of the Second World War, I think a powerful and effective superpower, we can talk about whether, has been the fact that it has a network of alliances built around the world, not just in Europe, but also in the Far East, that have been very much part of that liberal international order. Donald Trump has upended this. What it has done in terms of the State Department, for example, is I think it has also eroded it and sort of hollowed it out. And certainly if you read some of the analysis and comments from people in DC involved with the foreign policy establishment, there is a very real concern, and in fact people have put it on the table that one of the things that a Biden administration needs to focus on is rebuilding the State Department. That you can't just focus, for example, on defense, because as I think John Mattis said, if you don't give the diplomats sufficient resources, then you're going to have to be giving us many more resources as the Pentagon. That diplomacy has to be paramount, and certainly in a world which is so very different. And it's not only because of Donald Trump, but it is so different, and the geopolitics and the geopolitical tension is rising, that you need effective diplomacy, and you need to sort of return to a degree of predictability, because one of the greatest fears that I have sometimes when over the last 4 years, is that, nobody wants a real war. They want to push, right? It's a game of chicken, which is all great, as long as, you don't end up in a collision. And, I think back to the First World War, where nobody wanted to go to war, but they ended up because nobody was actually able to pull back from positions they had taken. And so when the dear old Archduke was assassinated, and there was an ultimatum, they then ended up in a huge conflagration. And some of the issues, some of the ways in which the US is engaging in East Asia, in the Middle East, we need to be very, very careful that, that sometimes things get out of control, even if you want to control them. And that's the biggest concern. And if you don't have an effective, capable, experienced State Department, because it's not, diplomacy is not just about the president. So the president went to, met with the North Korean leader. That hasn't gone anywhere. I mean, the guys who are doing the work are the guys in,
behind the scenes.
Behind the scenes, and so that is an issue that would have to be addressed in a Biden administration. I think it would be hollowed out more in a subsequent Trump administration.